Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. For the past 9 years at least, anomalous health incidents, also known as the Havana syndrome, have been a serious and persistent problem within the intelligence community. At first, there was a robust effort to investigate the cause of these incidences and to support the possible victims. Along with the other senators on this committee, I was one of the authors of the Havana Act to ensure that there was funding available for those who had been afflicted. However, more recently, support for both investigative analysis and for victims within the CIA have decreased. Then we've had some interesting developments. On December 5th, the House Committee on Intelligence released an unclassified report finding that there was an increasing likelihood that a foreign adversary was responsible for at least some of the reported AHI cases. Then on the 10th of January, the ODNI released an updated intelligence assessment of AHIs that revealed that 2 intelligence agencies reported that they believed a foreign actor may have used some sort of novel weapon or prototype device to inflict AHIs on our personnel. This is very disturbing to me. It raises questions of whether dissenting voices were suppressed in earlier analyses. And my basic question to you is this: what actions, if confirmed, will you take to ensure that the CIA aggressively and objectively investigates the causes of AHIs, including examining whether or not a foreign adversary is responsible for harming the men and women who are serving our country?
Senator Collins, thank you for the question. And I want to start by saying I enjoyed the chance to visit with you. And as you recall, we talked about this issue from my perspective 4 years ago when I was the Director of National Intelligence, and you were as concerned then as you are now about this issue, along with Senator Rubio. And I asked then CIA Director Haspel to look into the issue 4 years ago. Having stepped away, I share your frustration that 4 years later, we're very much in the same place in terms of trying to make an assessment and determination on the cause of this. And I share your frustration in not being able to understand why, but if confirmed and have the opportunity to be briefed on all of the assessments and intelligence, my pledge to you is that I will drill down and look carefully at that issue and work with you to see. I read the unclass report, the House report, and the unclassified version of the intelligence community assessment. I have not had access to my understanding, very lengthy classified report, but I look forward to drilling down on that because, as I talked about in my opening, the workforce has been affected by this, and it has affected their morale because of this. And it's why I highlighted that. And so, the cause of it is one point, but the care of the CIA workforce has been affected is another. But they're equally important to me. So my pledge is to look into it, but to work with you to try and. Obviously, we need to know if we have an adversary that is using a weapon against our people, and I look forward to my ability to look at that intelligence for myself.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you. I have very little time left. The chairman mentioned that the intelligence community, for which I have the greatest respect, has had some significant misjudgments lately. For example, there was a misjudgment of how long the Afghan government would stand after the United States' hasty and ill-advised withdrawal. The IC missed early assessments on Ukraine's willingness to fight, projecting incorrectly how quickly the Russians would be able to take Kyiv. They did not warn or predict of the Hamas mass attack against Israel. The IC was surprised at South Korea's martial law declaration, nor did they predict the rapid collapse of the Syrian regime. My question to you, and I know the IC's not going to get it right every time, but when there is a pattern, or even when there's a miss, what should the IC do to review why these major intelligence changes were not identified or predicted?
Well, thank you, Senator. It's what I talked about, I think, in response to Chairman Cotton's question about this, is that, the intelligence community isn't always going to get it right, hasn't always gotten it right, but we've had too many instances where you all, as policymakers, are finding out by watching news reports about some of these things that I think can be, in some cases at least, fairly characterized as intelligence failures or lapses. We talk about what can we do, what do we need to do. Part of it is a technical thing in terms of improving our collection, addressing ubiquitous technical surveillance. And I know I haven't been fully briefed on this, but I am impressed by some of the things that, for instance, the Directorate of Science and Technology is doing to help us solve for X with regard to operating as human sources in an environment of UTS. But I also think a bigger part of this that I'm going to focus on, Senator, is to look at what's happening in terms of the focus and execution on core mission. Better, as I said, good decisions are hostage to good information, and we all know that the human intelligence collection isn't where it needs to be. And so looking at the reasons why we've lost our focus there, and some of those things are, if you have a politically motivated, bureaucratically imposed social justice agenda that takes up part of your attention, that can distract from the core mission of collecting human intelligence that matters and providing it to you in a timely way. So my pledge to you is that I'm every bit as concerned, and I don't want those intelligence failures or lapses to happen on my watch, and will do everything that I can to make sure that it doesn't.
Sorry. As I said yesterday, I think it would have been helpful if the FBI report had been more detailed and if it had been shared with at least every member of the Armed Services Committee. But based on the information that I do have and my lengthy interview with him, his extensive writings, speakings, podcasts, I do believe I have sufficient information.
Thank you guys. Do you feel pressure to support him?
No, I always make my own decisions. I mean, I have voted on 196 cabinet nominees over the years, and I just do what I think is right. In general, I do believe the president deserves deference, but obviously I take seriously the advice and consent role assigned to the Senate.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gabbard, Edward Snowden does stand out as having done particularly grave harm to our national security by revealing top secret information, including sensitive sources and methods, thus jeopardizing agents in the field. So let me ask you a question. If confirmed, would you support or recommend a pardon or any kind of clemency for Edward Snowden?
Thank you for the question, Senator Collins. If confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, my responsibility would be to ensure the security of our nation's secrets and would not take actions to advocate for any actions related to Snowden.
So the answer is no. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Them.
As you know, there has been speculation in the press that you met with Hezbollah, a terrorist organization affiliated with Iran. Have you ever knowingly met with any members, leaders, or affiliates of Hezbollah?
No, and it is an absurd accusation.
Let me ask you one final question in the short time we have left. With Hamas, ISIS-K, the Houthis, all the Iranian proxies in Syria and Iraq, Yemen, and Al-Qaeda all posing general resurgences in the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia, I'm alarmed at the lack of focus by the IC on this threat to our safety. We don't want to have to call you back to this room after a terrorist attack and ask, how did the IC miss this? Great power competition, China, Russia, definitely pose threats to our country, but the terrorist threat is arguably the most imminent threat, according to former FBI Director Chris Wray. If confirmed, what would be your strategy to refocus the IC on the terrorist threat to our country and to Americans abroad?
Thank you, Senator. I agree with your assessment, and this speaks to the need for the ODNI to exist, to redirect those resources, identifying the gaps in intelligence so that we are able to get ahead of these threats instead of coming around after the fact and trying to assess why did we not know about this sooner so that we could have taken action to prevent it.
Thank you.
Who would have been here the whole time, but she was in an Intel committee.
Thank
So, Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, welcome, first of all. I agree with you that there needs to be more focus on chronic diseases like diabetes, like Alzheimer's. But it concerns me when I read a quote from you that says, I'm going to say to NIH scientists, God bless you all. Thank you for your public service. We're going to give infectious diseases a break for about 8 years. Don't we need to do both? Don't
Yes, absolutely, Senator. The problem is there's been an imbalance. We've devoted all of these dollars to infectious disease and to drug development, to make NIH an incubator for the pharmaceutical industry, and very little to chronic disease. But chronic disease is 92% of deaths in our country. It's 9 out of every $10 we spend on our budget. Why aren't we devoting at least equivalent studies to determining the etiology of our chronic disease? It just seems like common sense to me.
I would point out that in many cases it's Congress rather than HHS who sets the funding levels for various diseases.
But NIH decides, has panels that decide who gets funding, not Congress, Senator.
I want to share with you a discussion that I had with a Maine pediatric nurse practitioner. She raised the concern that if people are discouraged from getting their children vaccinated, we will lose the herd immunity in a classroom. And that means that a child who may be immunosuppressed and cannot get a vaccine are at risk of being in a classroom with an unvaccinated child, and thus at risk of getting the infectious disease because we've lost the herd immunity. What would be your response to that?
My response is that vaccine uptake for the COVID vaccine, for example, is down to 23%. And all vaccines are dropping, and they're doing that because people don't believe the government anymore. We need good science, and I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to restore trust, and that will restore vaccine uptake.
Well, you're certainly correct about what happened with the COVID vaccine, but let me switch to the polio vaccine. Do you think that the polio vaccine is safe and effective?
Yes, I do.
And so would you seek to reduce its availability in any way?
No, not at all.
The state of Maine has seen a steady and disturbing increase in Lyme disease cases over the past decade. We talked a little bit about this in my office. In 2023, Maine had a record number of Lyme disease cases, nearly 3,000 reported cases. Fortunately, there is a promising vaccine trial for Lyme disease that is underway at Maine Health in Portland. Access to a Lyme disease would be a monumental step forward in reducing the burden of this disease, which can have lifelong effects. I've seen it in members of my own family. As HHS Secretary have confirmed, what influence would you exercise over new vaccine approvals, such as one for Lyme disease?
Senator, you and I have talked about this issue. I've had Lyme disease. I lived in the epicenter of Lyme disease. Every member of my family my immediate family has had Lyme disease. I had a son whose face was paralyzed for a year. I have a son today who has been suffering with devastating effects from Lyme disease for 2 years. There's nobody who will fight harder to find a vaccine or a treatment for Lyme disease than me.
I very much appreciate that assurance, and I'm sorry that your own family has been so adversely affected. In Maine, we have a lot of people who work outside and work in the woods, and ticks are everywhere. So this is a very important issue to me. Thank you.
And to me too, Senator.
Ms. Gabbard, Edward Snowden does stand out as having done particularly grave harm to our national security by revealing top secret information, including sensitive sources and methods, thus jeopardizing agents in the field. So let me ask you a question. If confirmed, would you support or recommend a pardon or any kind of clemency for Edward Snowden?
Thank you for the question, Senator Collins. If confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, my responsibility would be to ensure the security of our nation's secrets and would not take actions to advocate for any actions related to Snowden.
So the answer is no. Is
Correct.
that correct?
With that, Mr. President, I see that my friend from Maine and the chairman of this great committee that we're going to make sure is able to do its work. I yield to her.
Mr. President.
Recognizes the senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the senator from Alaska, who is an extraordinarily talented leader on the Appropriations Committee, for her comments. Mr. President, I rise to urge passage of this funding measure to prevent an unnecessary, harmful, and costly government shutdown at midnight tonight. Mr. President, government shutdowns are inherently a failure to govern effectively and have negative consequences all across government. They inevitably require certain government employees, such as Border Patrol agents, members of our military and Coast Guard, TSA screeners, and air traffic controllers, to report to work with no certainty at all on when they will receive their next paycheck. That's just unfair. Shutdowns also put critical investments in our national defense on hold. Training exercises would be limited, which could hurt our nation's readiness. New programs would be paused, delaying new capabilities from getting to our warfighters. That's why we have always in the past avoided CRs for the Department of Defense. At our borders, the men and women performing vital law enforcement activities would have to do so without pay and without the assistance of support staff, putting more pressure on frontline operators. Other harmful potential impacts include curtailed operations for the Veterans Benefits Administration, resulting in the closure of education and GI Bill call centers and the suspension of career counseling and transition assistance for our veterans. The closure of our wonderful national parks to visitors, increased travel delays as the onboarding of additional TSA agents would stall, and some FAA employees would face furloughs, and costly delays for projects at the Army Corps of Engineers and critical water infrastructure projects. That is just a very partial list of the harm that would be done from a government shutdown. This unfortunate situation that we're in with a continuing resolution should, however, have been avoided. The Senate should have finished these bills last year, and I called for that repeatedly, as did many other members. Senator Murray and I worked as a team, provided leadership, consulted with the members of our Senate Appropriations Committee. Each of us worked so hard to report 11 of the 12 bills with overwhelming bipartisan support, including 6 which came out of our committee unanimously. Unfortunately, these bipartisan bills languished on the calendar for months, never being brought to the floor for consideration. This decision by the then Senate Majority Leader denied senators the opportunity to debate and amend our reported bills, and denied the House and the Senate the chance to go to conference and work out the differences among the bills. Similarly, attempts since January by House Chairman Tom Cole and I to reach agreement with our Democratic counterparts regrettably were not successful, despite my making 5 good faith offers. Now, Madam President, that opportunity is gone. A year-long CR is by no means my first choice, but our focus now, given where we are, must be on preventing a government shutdown. For the most part, this is a straightforward CR that simply continues fiscal year 2024 funding levels. Now, It does include, and this is important, a number of needed anomalies that are aimed at addressing pressing needs. For example, the CR realigns funding in the appropriations accounts for the Department of Defense to meet current global threats and cover the cost of pay raises for junior enlisted personnel. It provides increased funding for housing assistance and for what is known as the WIC program for women, infants, and children to maintain support for these vulnerable families. Within the Department of Homeland Security, the continuing resolution includes targeted increases to support ICE operations, avoid furloughs of TSA airport screeners, and to fund much-needed pay raises for members of our Coast Guard. It also includes increased funding for the FAA so that more air traffic controllers can be hired to make our nation's airspace safer. Madam President, we can delay no longer. It is essential that the continuing resolution be adopted today in order to prevent a harmful government shutdown. I urge its adoption. And Madam President, let each and every one of us here commit to working together on the FY 2026 budget so that we enact appropriations bills prior to the start of the new fiscal year. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today in support of the resolution introduced by my colleague from Virginia, Senator Kaine, to overturn the emergency declaration for the northern border that is being used to impose tariffs on goods imported from Canada. Mr. President, the Maine economy is integrated with Canada, our most important trading partner, from home heating oil, gasoline, jet fuel, and other refined petroleum products, to Maine's paper mills, forest products businesses, agricultural producers, and lobstermen. The tariffs on Canada would be detrimental to many Maine families and our local economies. Mr. President, of course, I share the President's goal of stemming the tide of dangerous fentanyl that flows into the United States. I commend him for taking far stronger actions to halt this dangerous and deadly flow than did the previous administration. I do not, however, agree with his invoking the powers of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs on Canadian goods and products. The fact is, the vast majority of fentanyl in America comes from the southern border. In fiscal year 2024, less than 1% of fentanyl seizures occurred at our northern border. And our Canadian neighbors are working collaboratively and cooperatively with our government to stop that trafficking. Mr. President, one of the best examples of the intertwined relationship between Maine's economy and Canada can be seen at the Twin Rivers paper mill in Madawaska, Maine, way in the north on the Canadian border. Twin Rivers produces lightweight specialty paper for packaging materials for our nation's newspapers and our retailers' catalogs, for food and environmentally safe papers used in restaurants, and for a wide variety of other paper goods that are used all over the country. The raw pulp for this paper mill in Maine is piped across the St. John River from Edmundston, New Brunswick to Madawaska, Maine. There literally is a pipeline through which the pulp travels between these two sister mills. A tariff placed on this pulp would jeopardize the financial well-being of this vital paper mill, which employs more than 500 people in rural northern Maine. There is not another big employer in that area that could possibly compensate for the loss of those 510 direct jobs. And that doesn't include the indirect jobs, the truck drivers, the loggers, the restaurant owners who would be harmed by the closure or reduction in the operation of this vitally important mill. The tariff would not only devastate Twin Rivers, but also harm hundreds of Maine families. Another example of our integration with Canada is in energy. 95% of the heating oil that is used by most Mainers to heat their homes comes from refineries in Canada. Irving Oil, a Canadian-based company, has 150 gas stations in Maine and supplies 2/3 of the state's gas, diesel, and heating oil. This includes, Mr. President, 100% of the jet fuel that is used by the Air National Guard base in Bangor. Maine consumers, Maine businesses, and the U.S. Department of Defense, our own Department of Defense, would bear the cost of that Canadian energy tariff. Mr. President, Canadian tariffs would also harm many Maine farmers, lobstermen, and fishermen. According to the Maine Potato Board, 90% of the potash, which is the fertilizer used for growing potatoes, is imported from Canada. Fertilizer accounts for 11% of total input costs to grow our great Maine potatoes. Tariffs on imports like fertilizer will only hurt Maine potato growers. And Mr. President, I grew up in Aroostook County. I know these potato growers. I picked potatoes as a school child when I was growing up. Just recently, a farmer from Mars Hill, Maine, told me that just the threat of tariffs is causing a price increase on seed and equipment. This farmer supplies potatoes to a Canadian company with facilities on both sides of the border. The different facilities have specialized equipment to process potatoes for different uses. Hash browns in one plant, curly fries in another. A tariff on potatoes as they cross back and forth between Maine and Canada would cause terrible harm to this and other growers. Other products are processed back and forth across the border as well. For example, many Maine blueberries are processed in Prince Edward Island. Maine also sends between $200 million and $400 million worth of lobster to Canada each year for processing. There are 240 lobster processing plants in Canada, but only 15 in the United States. I share the president's goal of getting more of that manufacturing done in the state of Maine, done in the United States. But the fact is that if we impose these tariffs on Canadian processing, it's going to be our Maine lobstermen who will bear the cost. It's going to be consumers who bear the cost. I'd like to make mention of another industry that would be affected as well, and that is the aquaculture industry. In Washington County, in far eastern Maine, Cook Aquaculture is one of the largest employers with more than 200 direct jobs throughout the state. While they have a processing plant in Machias, Maine, the first step of their salmon processing occurs in Canada before re-entering the United States for finishing. At a time when the Maine aquaculture industry is growing, these tariffs on Canada would jeopardize current jobs and also block future ones. Mr. President, close relationships between and among families on both sides of the border are very common in the state of Maine. It's typical of communities ranging from Calais in the east, Fort Kent in the north, and Jackman in the west. You see it all across the northern, eastern, and western parts of our state because our communities are so integrated. It is not surprising to me that I had a conversation with members of the tourism industry in Maine just this morning who told me that they're seeing cancellations by Canadian tourists who have come for years to vacation in Maine. Old Orchard Beach, for example, is known for the number of Canadian tourists. We don't want to discourage these Canadian tourists who are so vital to Maine's economy from vacationing in Maine because they are so angry at what has happened. Maine families benefit from more than $900 billion in goods and services that are exchanged between our two countries every year. It is crucial that we remain a dependent and vibrant global trading partner, particularly with Canada. Now, I want to distinguish that I think there is a strong case to be made for tariffs on Mexico, on our adversary China, but I don't see the case for Canada. There are areas where Canada does need to do better, and the dairy industry is one. And I hope that we will see that result. And let me conclude my remarks by reaffirming my support for ensuring that the Department of Homeland Security has every tool at its disposal to stem the flow of fentanyl into our nation. But unlike Mexico and China, Canada is not complicit in this crisis, and we should continue working with our Canadian allies to secure the northern border, not unfairly penalize them. Our consumers, our manufacturers, our lobstermen, our blueberry growers, our potato farmers will pay the price. Mr. President, the price hikes that will happen for Maine families, every time they go to the grocery store, they fill their gas tank, they fill their heating oil tank, if these tariffs go into effect, will be so harmful. And as price hikes always do, they will hurt those the most who can afford them the least. Therefore, I will support this resolution, and I urge my colleagues to do so likewise. Thank you, Mr. President.
I guess I'm curious, is it time for Trump to change course of the economy, particularly tariffs?
My position on tariffs is very clear.
Are you thinking about how to strategize on NIH funding? Are you still going to push for more funding, research, medical research funding?
Yes.
Are you going to vote for this measure today, the Rand Paul Wyden tariff plan to stop the tariffs?
That is.
Collins to start that process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary Rollins.
Thank you.
It is great to see you here today. When we first met, we discussed PFAS. Those are the toxic class of forever chemicals that are being found in our soils, water, animal feed, crops, and livestock. In Maine, the presence of PFAS in wastewater sludge that was spread decades ago as a fertilizer is preventing some of our family farmers from being able to sell their products, causing them significant financial harm. To support these affected farmers and to come up with solutions, the University of Maine is undertaking research on the presence of PFAS in agricultural land. To build upon this work, I secured $17 million in fiscal year 2024 for the ARS and the University of Maine to establish a new center of excellence for PFAS solutions. And the whole purpose is to help address these very serious PFAS contamination in agriculture. Madam Secretary, will you continue to support the partnership between ARS and the University of Maine in establishing this research center to help our farmers? And I would note that the research that's being done there won't just help the farmers in Maine, but across the nation.
Across the country. Well, Madam Chairman, as we discussed, this is an issue that is very close to my family's heart. My mom, Helen Kerwin, is almost 78. She is the youngest elected freshman to the Texas House of Representatives in Texas history, and her number one issue is PFAS. And she decided to run for a lot of reasons, but one of those was, I believe it was the New York Times did an expose or a big story, if you will, on a farm in Johnson County, Texas, which is close to where we grew up and where my mom still lives, rural Texas. And she was so stunned by what had happened to these farmers, and specifically through the PFAS contamination. It had destroyed their lives. And so she became very, very passionate about this particular issue. She is crushing it in her first session in the Texas legislature right now. And in fact, her very first bill that she will get a hearing on is her PFAS bill, and it will be tomorrow in Austin. So I've been hearing a lot about this at the family dinner table for quite some time now. But yes, we remain committed to this research, very proud of that $7 million grant to the Center for Excellence. And I think that, at least according to my mom, who is amazing, raised my sisters and me by herself, she was a single mom, but at least according to my mom, Maine leads the way in many respects on this important issue for all of our farmers and our ranchers. And I'm excited to learn more, perhaps even come visit the center in Maine, see the work that they're doing firsthand, and to continue to support it. So thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank you so much. And in this case, listening to your mother makes all the
sense in the world. I need to tell my 4 teenagers that, but yes, yes.
In late March, I wrote you a letter detailing my concerns about USDA's delay in releasing some program funds. I've heard from constituents who have received grant award letters from USDA in the previous administration, only to later receive letters from USDA informing them that their grant funding is frozen. Now, this is obviously very troubling to them. It creates a lot of uncertainty. And we are a state that has lost 600 farms in the past decade. And that is very troubling to me. I grew up in northern Maine. One of my first jobs was picking potatoes for a farmer. And I am aware of how important that heritage is to our state and to our food supply. So we've seen a situation where farmers, landowners, loggers, natural resource businesses that have applied for USDA loans still have no clarity on what decisions will be made. And the timing of this funding is absolutely critical because, as you know well, agricultural producers are making purchases now for this year's crops, and processing facilities need to order equipment for the summer and the fall harvest. Local farm economies are fragile, and timing is really important. So I know and appreciate that you've made some significant strides in releasing program funding over the past few weeks. Could you provide the subcommittee with an update on federal funding at USDA that remains frozen and a timeline for when you plan to finish your reviews?
I will, and I take to heart so sincerely everything you've said, and I know many of you have reached out during this process of frozen funds from both sides of the aisle, and my goal is to respond immediately. Sometimes it's at midnight, sometimes it's at 5 a.m., but my goal is always to respond and to be available. I have an amazing team. Kaylee Bowler is our chief of staff. She's here, Jen Teller, and a few others that you all probably know well. And we are working around the clock, going line by line by line. We're down to the final $5 billion out of, I believe, almost $20 billion of frozen funds. But $5 billion is a lot of money. And when you think about that in terms of, grant or contract and moving that out quickly, we're very hopeful to keep moving through that very, very quickly and have that done very soon. But what I will say, and you all know this that have worked with me, I am always available. So if there is one or a group in particular that you want us to make sure we're getting to, please just let me know. If I know almost everybody here has my cell phone number, maybe not a few of you, but I'm always available. Several of these guys have it too. So just call me and just know we're doing our very, very, very best. Some of the funding that we have pulled back and then reopened, we've asked for reapplications to realign around this president's priorities, which of course, not surprisingly, is not diversity, equity, and inclusion or some climate programs, but instead to reapply where the farmer or rancher would receive 65% of the funding or more. That's another piece of this as well. So we, again, are going line by line. We're working around the clock, and believe me, we are on it. But please know to always reach out if there's something specific, and I hear you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam Chairman.
Appreciate it. Senator Shaheen.
Well, we thank you for your opening statement, and now we're going to go to Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, before I begin my comments, let me salute you for your leadership of this subcommittee. I once had the position that you now hold, and I know how important it is, and I want to welcome the new vice chair as well. And I know that you will work together and continue your great work. Mr. Secretary, I want to begin by thanking you for recognizing so swiftly the need for a replacement and modernization of our air traffic control system. And the presence of the Lilies here today reminds us all of what is at stake. So thank you for being here as well. For years, this committee has put money into modernizing the air traffic control system, and we just never have seen real results. A radar would be fixed here or there, but what we really need to do is completely modernize the entire system, and I know that that is your goal. That's going to cost significant money, but it is an investment that we must make. We are facing a crisis. When I learned from you that we were still using copper rather than fiber, it is stunning. So my question to you is, will you work with the committee on the concept of having emergency funding that would cover the entire cost of this much-needed replacement?
I appreciate the question, Senator, and I'm grateful for the conversations you've had with me on this topic. Yeah, I'm happy to work with this committee and the whole body. I think one of the mistakes of the past is we did do piecemeal funding without a big vision, and sometimes we were trying to deploy high-tech ideas where the system that we were operating off of was not ready for those high-tech ideas. And so what I'm going to ask and I don't know what vehicle you want to use, I don't know what the approach will be from this body, but I would like this body to give the DOT and the FAA the money up front, advanced appropriations. And with that, I will be happy myself or the FAA come back, I think, on a quarterly basis and give you updates on the progress, good, bad, and ugly. Are we hitting our timelines? Are we behind? Are we on budget? I think America and the body, if you buy into this idea, deserve that. I also think we're going to have to think about, can we get permitting reform? This can be slowed down by the permitting process, but if we're laying fiber, we're not building, 4-lane highways, we're not building skyscrapers. It's a pretty streamlined approach, but if we're going to build fast, which is necessary, I do think we'll need permitting reform as well from this body, and I think I'm committed to working with all of you on however you can envision us doing this together. I would welcome the opportunity. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. I also want to echo the chair's concerns about the administration's budget cuts for the Essential Air Service Program. This program is a lifeline to rural communities, not only in Maine, but across America. In Maine, we have 5 airports that would not have commercial air service, but for the Essential Air Service Program. They include Augusta, Waterville, Hancock County, Bar Harbor, Rockland, and Presque Isle, Maine. Just last weekend, I participated in a groundbreaking for a new terminal at the Presque Isle Airport. So this is really important for economic development, for getting to medical treatment, for tourism. It's so important to rural America to have this program. How would you plan to support air service to rural communities who rely on this program absent a sufficiently funded EAS program?
I anticipated I was going to get a number of questions from virtually everyone on this panel about this program. I understand your concern. I am going to work on trying to bring efficiencies to the program, bring costs down on the program. As I dig into that, I'd be happy to partner and communicate with all of you on the committee as we go through that process. Again, I do understand how meaningful Essential Air Service is for so many communities across the country, and I need to do some work in the coming weeks. And as I do that, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about how we're seeing it and how we think we can do more with less.
Thank you. I think you're going to need to do more with more, but I appreciate your commitment to work with the committee. Maine is home of the Maine Maritime Academy, which has a well-earned reputation for educating some of the best mariners anywhere in the world. And fortunately, the faculty and the midshipmen are eagerly awaiting the completion of the Academy's new state-of-the-art training vessel, which is going to greatly enhance mariner training and preparedness. I understand that you recently saw Maine Maritime's training vessel during a trip to the Philadelphia shipyard, and I welcome you to come see it again after it has completed its voyage to the beautiful coast of Maine. Could you talk just briefly, because we're out of time almost, about the emphasis that the administration is placing on better preparing our maritime workforce?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I'll be quick. The ship is beautiful. By the way, Myriad is building ships on budget and on time. The Maine is one of them. I think we have to invest in shipbuilding in America. The seas are so important for defense, for moving products, and we have ceded this territory to Japan, South Korea, to China specifically, and we have to revitalize American shipbuilding. It's going to take vision, and it's going to take help from this body and presidential leadership, but I do think it's important. And then when we have those ships, we need mariners to sail those ships. And our academies across the country are critical to bring out those young men and women who can operate the great vessels for this country.
We look forward to your visit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Secretary, and I am going to turn to the chair of the full committee, who we're honored to have here, as always, Senator Susan Collins, for 7 minutes for her questioning.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank the Vice Chair as well. Welcome, Secretary Kennedy. Secretary Kennedy, the military services submit to Congress what is known as an unfunded priorities list. It includes funding requests that were not included in the president's budget, but oftentimes we take from that list and do fund what the military was unable to get into the president's budget. And just to give you some idea, the unfunded priorities list range from more battleships to better housing for our troops to weapons R&D. It really covers the map. Your department's budget has been sharply cut by 26% below the fiscal year 2025 level. If you were required, as our military services are, to submit an unfunded priorities list, what would you include on it?
That's a good question, Senator. I would include the research that has been neglected for the past 20 years on chronic disease and what's caused us to go from 3% of Americans of children having chronic disease when I was a little boy and my uncle was president to 60% today. I would want to look at the thousands, over 10,000 chemicals that are now in our food. Most of them have never been tested. I'd want to look at what's causing the infertility crisis. Why are girls in this country reaching puberty 6 years early? They're earlier than historically. Why do boys in this country have half the testosterone teenagers of a 68-year-old man? Half the sperm count of a 60-year-old man. I would want to do research on why our bees are disappearing, why 90% hive collapse happened, which is a food issue. I would want to look at the microbiomes in the soil and how that's contributing to erosion and how chemicals that we're using in agriculture are sickening farmers in many cases, potentially, and are destroying the microbiome and creating a situation where soil is running off and where most agronomists believe that we only have 60 harvests left. And I would want to look at why we're having an explosion in Alzheimer's in this country, not just curing it, but what is causing it. And I think NIH has done a very good job at making cancer more survivable. For example, colorectal cancer, where there's been extraordinary science done at NIH. Why isn't NIH asking the question, why do we have colorectal cancer in children? This is something that's new to humanity. It was never known before. And now it's an epidemic in our children, and we need to have a balance where we're looking at cures for diseases, but we're also focusing on how to keep Americans healthy so that we can beat these ruinous healthcare costs and that we can have a healthy, productive society.
Thank you. I want to turn to a couple of other issues. First of all, the LAHI program, which we've talked about, is absolutely vital for thousands of older Mainers and low-income families. It helps them avoid the constant worry of having to choose between keeping warm, buying essential foods and medications and other basic necessities. Now, I was pleased to see the release of the rest of the fiscal year 2025 funds, but the administration's new budget seeks to eliminate what is truly a critical program. Will you work with this committee in trying to restore the LAHI program so that we can avoid literally seniors and low-income families not being able to keep warm in the winter?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm from New England. Myself, my brother, for 40 years has run a Citizens Energy, which provides low-cost home heating oil to families in New England. And so many people have come to me over the years and said to me, thank you, your brother saved my life, because I didn't have to choose between food and heat. I was on the Navajo reservation 3 weeks ago, and Navajo President Boo Nygren said to me, if we cut LAHI, Navajo will die from it. So I understand the critical historical importance of this program. President Trump's rationale and OMB's rationale is that President Trump's energy policies are going to lower the cost of energy so this program, so that everybody will get lower cost heating oil. And in that case, this program would simply be another subsidy to the fossil fuel industry. If that doesn't happen, then I would, and Congress chooses to appropriate the money, I, of course, will spend it. I've already directed the spending of $400 million in this year's budget to that, and I will work with you to make sure that those families do not suffer in that way.
Thank you. You and I have had many conversations about Alzheimer's disease and the BOLD Act. I do want to point out the CDC's cooperative agreements for the Healthy Brain Initiative and 3 dementia public health centers of excellence under the BOLD Act are set to expire at the end of September. We initially expected that the CDC would put out a notice encouraging applications early this year. Inexplicably, no such notice has been issued, even though we reauthorized the BOLD Act and funding is available under the appropriations measure that President Trump signed into law in March. How and when does HHS plan to issue this notice of funding opportunity so that we can continue what has been a very effective approach to the Healthy Brain Initiative and Centers of Excellence? It helps caregivers. It encourages early diagnosis. It really has been an important program, taking the kind of public health approach that you've generally supported.
Yeah, Senator, because of the TRO from the federal judge on this issue that was issued last week, I've been instructed by HHS and by White House attorneys that I can't speak directly to that part of the reorg. You know, I have a strong personal commitment to, as I said before, to Alzheimer's, to dementia, and it's affected members of my family, and I understand how important these programs have been. And whatever happens, we will continue that research.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair Captain.
Welcome, Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, as you are well aware, last month the Department of Labor announced that enrollment at Maine's 2 Job Corps centers was abruptly halted. The Loring and the Penobscot Job Corps centers serve nearly 500 students in Maine each year and have become important pillars of support for some of our most vulnerable teenagers. Loring also has 129 staff members and is one of the largest employers in rural northern Maine. Then the administration submitted a budget request that proposes to eliminate Job Corps altogether. This will deprive thousands, tens of thousands of Job Corps students across the country of the opportunity to gain valuable skills and credentials to pursue higher education or enter the workforce or join the military. It's clear that Job Corps, while not perfect, works. And I want to tell you the personal story of a young woman, and I've put up her pictures so that you can see her. I first met Adez Torres in 2008 when she was a Job Corps student in northern Maine at the Loring Center. She was originally from Connecticut. She was experiencing homelessness. She was in a very difficult, dangerous situation, and she recognized that she needed to change her life. She learned about Job Corps largely by chance, and I asked her, how did you choose the Job Corps Center in northern Maine? She said, I needed to get as far away in the Northeast from the terrible environment in which I was living that I possibly could. Well, the story has a very happy ending. In 2019, I was the commencement speaker at Hudson University in Bangor. And who comes up to me but Adez? She has earned with honors her nursing degree. She went on to get her nurse practitioner degree. She totally turned around her life. And that is the second picture that I'm showing you. And you'll notice that she is holding in her hands the pictures that we took when the Job Corps students came in 2008 to see me here in Washington. Job Corps literally saved her life. And she has been in the medical field ever since. It was Job Corps that made this possible. So I, for the life of me, do not understand why the administration wants to eliminate this valuable program. And I know when we've had a discussion on the cost, it is so much more expensive if someone, because of the influence and lack of support, ends up addicted or sex trafficked or in jail than it is to have them go to a Job Corps center and receive the guidance and skills that they need to turn around their lives. And I wanted to make this real to you by showing you the two pictures and the change in this young woman's life. So in making these decisions, did you consider the potential impact that halting enrollment at the two centers in Maine, and then, which you did only in the state of Maine, and also proposing the elimination of the program on people's like Adez, whose life was changed and I would argue saved by Job Corps?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate this. First and foremost, I want to say at the front end, we agree that this population is somebody we all care about. That is not the essence of what we're here to talk about, but we do have to discuss the sustainability of Job Corps. I was a Job Corps champion in Congress as well. I fought for all of these kids alongside of you. I understand that how important they are to not only our respective states, but to our countries as well. We issued at the Department of Labor, and I know we've had this conversation, and I know it will be ongoing with your office and many others, because it's essential that we address the population of 16 to 24 these are really essentially pre-apprenticeship programs that we know that they need the skills and the training for their entire lives, as you said, can be many more things than just upskilling, but we do have to look at it from a perspective, is it sustainable over time? And so we've released, the Department of Labor, a public transparency report that has never been done before and never exposed the costs for each and every state. And I know that I've shared with many of you the respective costs. I will continue to look at this, but the transparency report shines a light of the serious flaws of this program. So here's what I would say. Can we imagine together what it's like to continue to focus on this population throughout the country and do it better, more responsibly, and protect the American taxpayer? Because on the outcome, we want those tax dollars to be spent in a responsible way and still have the measured outcome that serves this young woman and many others. That's what I'm focused on doing, and I am committed to each and every one of you to work through that process and what that looks like. No final decision has been made, but we are reviewing every Job Corps facility, and I understand the President's budget is signaling that this is not something that is sustainable over time. It's a $1.7 billion program with a 38% graduation rate, when oftentimes the cost of almost $50,000 per student, and to get out about $156,000. We are in the hole now. I would have to come to the Appropriations Committee and ask for more money to just get us back to baseline, to have a graduation rate of 32%. So can we do better? I think we can. And I'm committed to working with all of you, because this population of people is important to me, just like it is to you. And so if you'll allow me to continue that conversation with you along the way, I promise you, we won't forget this population. We want them trained, upskilled, reskilled, and have a job that changes their lives for the future of this country as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, temporary chair. But it's been an honor to work with you on so many issues that we care about in this space, including type 1 diabetes in particular. Doctor, I appreciated hearing your comments this morning. Americans have relied on the FDA for more than a century to ensure that their medicines are both safe and effective. Recognizing that America biotech leads the world in innovation, we in Congress have taken a number of actions to ensure that FDA's rigorous regulatory review keeps pace with the speed of science and solves problems in areas where we don't have cures or effective treatments or a means of prevention. Recent staffing changes at the FDA appear to have affected the balance between innovation and regulatory review from what I'm hearing. I'm particularly concerned about the downstream impact of delays on patients suffering from debilitating rare diseases like ataxia and Barth syndrome, as well as more common terrible diseases like ALS, which you mentioned, Alzheimer's, and other neurodegenerative diseases. As I mentioned, Senator Sheehan and I'm sorry, I'm out of it today, apparently. Dr. We have worked together on type 1 diabetes for many years. We're encouraged by what's going on in stem therapy and immunotherapy in that area. And today, you yourself talked about the need for more efficient regulatory pathways and innovative treatments for rare life-threatening diseases, particularly when there are no major safety issues and existing treatments are either don't exist or they're limited. So what I'm hearing is there's a real slowdown at FDA. And that's not what you were committing to today, but that's what I'm hearing the reality is. There are a number of rare disease, new drug applications that have been pending at FDA for some time. What specifically is FDA doing under your leadership to accelerate getting new treatments for rare diseases to patients safely and as soon as possible, particularly since we have developed these accelerated pathways, particularly for those patients for which there are no treatment options now?
Good to see you, Senator Collins. I share in your interest in this topic because I have cared for people with rare diseases and rare cancers, and it is the worst feeling in the world to have to break bad news. And when people say, is there anything out there to not have anything to respond with, is a very difficult position. So we need to customize the regulatory process to the condition being treated. And so if it is a rare condition, we have to drop our randomized control trial requirements in some instances. I will say, however, that the trains are running on time at the FDA. There have been no staffing changes that have changed any approval schedules. We are on track to meet all of our PDUFA targets. There are, on occasion, every year, essentially every year, a couple drugs that are very complex where the career scientists ask for more time, either to convene an advisory committee to weigh in or to design a very unique, specific randomized trial. So in reference to one of the products that you had mentioned, I had gotten briefed and was assured that there was no delays related to staffing. These were additional time because of the complexity of the early data, and the staff truly believed, career scientists truly believed they needed a few more weeks. And I thought, we're on track to meet our PDUFA targets. They believe we're completely on track to meet our PDUFA targets if they took a few more weeks, and I thought that was reasonable. The trains are running on time. The food inspectors are doing their job. We have 12 food labs. There's no backlog at the food labs. The cuts that you referenced and Senator Shaheen referenced were to things like this. 2,600, this is at the FDA, 2,600 HR staff, contract staff, and budget staff. Now, I think that's too much, and they were part of the reduction in force. In total, about 1,800, almost 1,900 people were involved in the reduction in force, and I think a lot of that is consolidation. Just to be clear, there were no reductions in scientific reviewers as a part of the reduction in force. And we're actually hiring scientists because there's normally turnover with our scientific staff. And I hope the AI and the other tools will help make their jobs more efficient.
Well, I am hearing something entirely different, so I will convey directly to you the concerns that I'm hearing since Dr. Peter Marks was removed from his position. And it is disheartening for patients with serious diseases, as you know very, very well from your clinical practice, for which I know you are a dedicated physician, but it is disheartening when it appears that a new treatment or drug is on the horizon, and then FDA says, no, we need 3 more months. We need 3 more months. We need 3 more months, over and over again, despite the years that have gone into developing a particular treatment for an illness that has no treatment. And again, that's why we work so hard to establish these accelerated pathways. So I'll be in further touch with you. I don't disagree with the need to look at the staffing of FDA and to make sure that as much of it as possible is going into the process that speeds food inspection, new drugs to the American people, sensible regulation and guidance on diet, lifestyle factors. All of that is extremely important. So it's not that I object to looking at that, but I don't want it to come at the expense of drugs that are desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I will just say that the scientist replacing Peter Marks is outstanding. And I would say, take a close look at his credentials. He has published over 540 peer-reviewed scientific articles. He's a professor from UCSF, trained at the National Cancer Institute. He's a scientific genius. So I reject the idea that there's only one scientist in the world that can run CBER well, and I think we need fresh new ideas. The new scientist replacing Peter Marks is 42-year-old. He brings a fresh new perspective, and it will not change our approach to rare diseases or the predictability that people need in the market and development investment space to know that they need to continue to invest in those technologies.
I look forward to meeting him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, welcome. It's great to see you here today. It probably won't surprise you, given the many discussions we've had about the lobster industry, that I'm going to start with my first question on that. Maine's lobster industry, as you know, is so important to the economy of Maine.
And to me as well. I love lobster.
And I've always known that. And it represents Maine. It's really an iconic industry for us of hardworking people that sustain many of our coastal communities. In 2022, the Biden administration proposed regulations that posed a threat to the very existence of the lobster fishery. If implemented, it would have shut down the lobster industry. The Maine delegation worked as a team, and we were able to successfully block those regulations and prevent them from going into effect for a period of years. Subsequently, the Maine Lobstermen's Association sued the National Department of the National Marine Fisheries Services in the Department of Commerce, and overwhelmingly won the case in June of 2023. And I want to read you just a little bit of what the judge said, what the three-court panel said in its decision. It said that the service had relied upon worst-case modeling that was, quote, very likely wrong, based on assumptions that the service conceded that it did not believe were accurate. Projections that are very likely wrong, obviously are not likely to occur. And what the court found was that the Service acted in an arbitrary and capricious way and blocked the regulations from going forward. But obviously, it's costly to go to court and to do that. So, Mr. Secretary, I know there's a new executive order that attempts to establish much higher standards for scientific research. It emphasizes rigorous evidence-based methodologies to inform federal regulations. Can you talk to us about how you believe that this new approach to regulation based in science will help protect the Maine fishing industry and our lobster industry from arbitrary and capricious regulations, as the court found was done in the previous administration?
This administration views the Maine lobster industry as an American treasure, and we need to protect it. And you will see as we do our trade deals, right? They treat the Maine lobster industry horribly. And in the UK deal, they said, we will invite you to 10 Downing Street and we will have now a lobster dinner. Okay, so we've opened, for example, the UK to lobster. We think this capricious lack of rigor in our science has got to end. So the gold standard executive order saying only real science, not opinion-based science, has to be the rule. So we protect our fishermen, we protect our ranchers, right? These are key things that this administration is going to drive for. So I completely agree with you. We will protect the great Maine lobster industry because it is a treasure for America.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We've also talked about how integrated the Maine economy is with Canada. And Canada's our closest neighbor, our dear friend, and our largest trading partner. And so I have been very concerned, and I know the department and you personally are working very hard on this issue about tariffs on Canadian products. Our lobster, our potatoes, our blueberries are largely processed in Canada and then come back across the border. We have a paper mill in northern Maine, in Madawaska, Maine, whose sister mill is right across the river in Canada. The sister mill in Canada produces the pulp that is piped across the river to the paper mill in Madawaska, Maine. So that's how close the partnership is. 95,000 Mainers are not connected to the New England electric grid. They get their electricity from Canada. I just mentioned these examples. 95% of our refined petroleum products come from Canada. 90% of potash, which is used, the fertilizer for potatoes, comes from Canada. Just to give you a few examples of how integrated our approach is, could you give me a brief update on where we stand with Canadian tariffs?
Sure. So the overriding principle is USMCA. So if the products are actually made in Canada and actually made in the United States, they come back and forth, and it's easy for them to fall under the USMCA, and that has no tariff, no tariff. Things that are outside of that, where companies chose to be outside of those rules, and those rules, as you know, have been in place quite a long time. If they're outside of those rules, then they have a tariff on them. They have the fentanyl tariffs, right? Because we needed to close the border and make sure fentanyl was not coming into the country. And people say, oh, Canada doesn't do much in fentanyl. But if you look at the fentanyl rings in Canada, they're often manned by Mexican cartels. So we needed to shut that. And so those outside of USMCA do pay a tariff, but those inside of USMCA are free of tariff.
Thank you. If you would provide us with a list of which products are under USMCA, that would be very helpful to us. I believe that a lot of the cases that I've mentioned will be under the USMCA
Correct.
and thus exempt from the tariff. But it would be good to have some certainty in that area. So if we could work with you and your staff to try to get a more definitive list, that would be very
Sure, that primarily comes from USTR, but I will call them and I will have it to you.
Thank
No
you
problem.
so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Collins, thank you very much. Senator Van Hollen. Thank you.
To turn to the chair of the committee, who we're very honored to have with us, Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Doctor, let me start by welcoming you to the committee. I am well aware that you have devoted your life to medical research, to health economics, and that you care very deeply about NIH. That is why the administration's reduction of more than $19 billion to the agency's budget, that is approximately 40%, is so disturbing. It would undo years of congressional investment in NIH, and it would delay or stop effective treatments and cures from being developed for diseases like Alzheimer's, cancer, type 1 diabetes. I could go on and on. We also risk falling behind China and other countries that are increasing their investment in biomedical research. Let me give a specific example. There are an estimated 7 million Americans living with Alzheimer's today. Barring any major breakthrough to prevent, slow down, or cure this devastating disease, this number could almost double to claim the lives of more than 13 million Americans by the year 2060. And that's why this committee has been so dedicated to increasing the funding for biomedical research and for Alzheimer's in particular to more than $3 billion last year alone. And it's produced results. We've seen the first 2 drugs that have been shown when administered early enough to slow cognitive decline. We have also seen the development of a breakthrough blood test, which will help lead to earlier diagnosis. Yet the administration's budget proposes a decrease of 40% for the National Institute on Aging, which funds most Alzheimer's research. As a senator representing the oldest state in the nation, this is of particular concern to me. And like Senator Capito, I too lost my father to this devastating disease, as well as my grandfather, 2 uncles, and just last year, a brother-in-law. So I know personally what it means to so many American families. Why is the administration proposing to cut the funding for the National Institutes of Aging when we are making progress in treating Alzheimer's and other dementias?
Senator, thank you for the question. And so first, let me just say that I am fully committed to making progress, scientific progress on Alzheimer's. I know all too well from my own research work and from friends and family members the devastating toll of this disease. And we have made tremendous progress. The NIH supports a very wide range of hypotheses on Alzheimer's, and it's resulted in some advances, like, for instance, the blood test for early detection. We still don't have, I think, in my professional opinion, a sufficient way to manage the disease, to prevent the disease and to cure the disease. We need more advances. And so I'm absolutely committed to making sure the NIH plays a tremendous role in that. The president wrote a letter to Michael Kratsios, his science advisor, committing the committing the United States to be the leading nation in the world in biomedicine. And so that's the intention of this administration. The budget, I mean, this is my first time through this budget fight, and so I'm still learning. But I'll tell you, from what I understand is that the budget is a collaborative effort between Congress and the administration. And I look forward to working with you all to advance the needs, the real health needs of not just the folks here in the room who represent Alzheimer's patients, but also the health needs of all Americans. We have tremendous health needs that we have to address. It's only excellent research that's going to solve those problems.
We look forward to working with you to remedy these problems and the deficiencies in the budget. Prior to your confirmation, NIH abruptly and without any notice or input from the scientific community announced a 15% arbitrary cap on research-related costs, also called indirect costs, for institutions that receive grants from the NIH. This proposed cap is so poorly conceived, and I've seen firsthand how harmful it is. It is leading to scientists leaving the United States for opportunities in other countries. It's causing clinical trials to be halted and promising medical research to be abandoned. It's also against federal law. Since 2018, we in Congress have specifically included language to prevent NIH from arbitrarily imposing such a cap. During your confirmation hearing, you committed to working with us on this issue. So I was alarmed and surprised that the administration's budget request contains the same harmful 15% cap. Recently, I met with Dr. Kelvin Drogenmeier, who was President Trump's science advisor during the first term. He has come up with two possible models, which are far fairer, make way more sense, increase accountability. Have you had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Drogenmeier and look at the models that he has come up with after extensive consultation?
So I spoke with Dr. Drogenmeier before he started the process, and he told me about those proposals, but in the planning stages. I have not yet met with him after because he had a working group that he put together of experts to think about this. I think that they're quite promising. The key thing, first, I can't speak about the 15% because it's subject to litigation, so I'm not going to. I don't want to get into that. But I want to bring the broader policy issue, which is how should the federal government support the research institutions of this country where the research we've been talking about take place. I think it is an opportunity to rethink that. We absolutely have an obligation to make sure that the institutions have the capacity to do the research correctly. Are we doing it fairly? Do we have processes in place that you have the sufficient geographic representation, that scientists across the country, wherever they are, have access? I think we can do a lot better, and I'd love to work with Congress to make to address that. I think there's lots of great possibilities for reform.
Thank you. I encourage you to sit down with Dr. Drogenmeier as soon as you can. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to close this meeting by, again, taking a moment to thank all the members of the committee and our staffs for all of their hard work, including the full committee staffs on both sides of the aisle who worked very closely with the subcommittee staffs. We've now reported 8 of the 12 annual bills with strong bipartisan support. And I would note that if you add those 8 bills together, they comprise approximately 87% of all discretionary spending. So we're making good progress, and we have to keep moving forward.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, today the Senate Appropriations Committee advanced legislation to reopen government immediately, funding vital programs and resuming pay for federal workers who, for the last 40 days, have had to live with the stress of missed paychecks and not knowing when they would be paid. Under our legislation, all federal employees, including members of our military and Coast Guard, the Capitol Police officers, Border Patrol agents, TSA screeners, air traffic controllers, all will receive their back wages. It is significant that this measure also includes 3 full-year, fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills, including the annual agriculture FDA bill, the military construction and Veterans Affairs legislation, very timely given that Veterans Day will soon be upon us, and the legislative branch funding. This 3-bill package, which originally passed the Senate on August 1st with overwhelming bipartisan support, 87 votes in 2 cases, 81 in another, will support our veterans, our troops, our farmers, and rural communities. Of note, this package will provide full-year funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, known as WIC. One of the most unfortunate and shameful consequences of the shutdown has been that these vital nutrition programs were in jeopardy for our most vulnerable families, including 170,000 Mainers who rely on the SNAP program. Other programs will be funded through January 30th, while the Senate and House continue our work on the remainder of the year-long appropriations bills. For example, funding for important programs like Head Start, and such as the Low-Income Heating Assistance Program will now be restored. I look forward to voting for this legislation and ending the unnecessary harm to the security of our families and our nations. We must begin to act tonight. We must not delay any longer. Finally, Mr. President, I want to thank the many members on both sides of the aisle of the Appropriations Committee and the Senate leadership who have worked especially hard to bring this package together. And I would be remiss if I did not also thank our staff. My staff missed an entire night's sleep to get this package together and get the job done. Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to particularly thank the members of the Appropriations Committee, including the 3 who served as the subcommittee chairs, Senator Bozeman, Senator Hoven, and Senator Mullen. I want to thank Senator Britt, who did an extraordinary amount of work, Lisa Murkowski, Mike Rounds, Jerry Moran, Sherry Moore Capito, Sidney Hyde-Smith, Deb Fisher. There's so many who worked so hard on this package. I want to thank each and every one of them. Let's get the job done, and let's do it fast. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hoven in my list. Senator Hoven was a rock star, so I want to make sure that I mentioned him. Thank you.
Senator from Vermont, Maine.
Mr. President, this is the 41st day of an entirely unnecessary government shutdown, a shutdown that never should have occurred, a shutdown that has caused tremendous harm to the American people, to our national security, to our entire country, a shutdown that has resulted in federal employees being furloughed, laid off, or forced to work without compensation. A shutdown that is causing enormous uncertainty and stress for families that rely upon the SNAP program for the nutrition that they need. A shutdown that is causing families to wonder, are they going to be able to fly to see the grandparents on Thanksgiving? A shutdown that never should have occurred. Mr. President, we finally have the ability tonight to end this shutdown. We have put forth the Appropriations Committee working in a bipartisan way with members on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers, a package of bills that includes a continuing resolution that will reopen government immediately once it is passed by this Senate, the House, and signed into law by the President. It is legislation that, due to incredibly good work by Senators Jeanne Shaheen, Tim Kaine, Katie Britt, the White House, and many of us, will ensure that those federal employees who have been furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay will receive their back pay, will be recalled to their jobs if they were laid off as a result of this shutdown. That will make a huge difference to these federal employees who have worked so hard to serve the people of our nation. This package of bills also includes three year-long appropriations bills that were passed by overwhelming margins, bipartisan margins, more than 80 votes in each case by the members of this Senate way back on August 1st. These bills are the agriculture bill, the agriculture FDA bill, which Senator Bozeman chairs that subcommittee, and it includes funding for the SNAP program, for the Women's, Infants, and Children's Nutrition Program known as WIC, for our farmers, for rural development, for our rural communities throughout this country. A very important bill, a bill that will take away the worry that families who are low income, that seniors who are low income and rely upon the SNAP program or the WIC program are feeling today about whether the funding is going to be there. That concern goes away with the passage of this full year appropriations bill that extends until the end of September of next year. A second bill in this package is the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill. That subcommittee is chaired, I've actually mixed up the two subcommittees. Agriculture is chaired by Senator Hoeven, and the Military Construction VA bill is chaired by Senator Bozeman. They are both extraordinary chairmen who work in a bipartisan manner with their ranking minority members and with their House counterparts. Think about it. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. Wouldn't it be wonderful if tonight the Senate passes the bill that provides year-long funding through the end of this fiscal year to September 30th of next year for our VA? What a way to tell our veterans how much we value their sacrifice and their service, a debt to them that we can never fully repay. That is so important to get that bill through. And military construction projects, what a difference that makes to our troops all over the world. There are two that matter a great deal to me in the state of Maine. One that will help the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which I worked with my fellow senator from Maine and our two senators from New Hampshire, and one that will benefit the Air National Guard base in Bangor, Maine, where I live. I am so proud of that base. It does more refuelings than any base on the East Coast during wartime, and it is extraordinarily skillful and filled with patriots. They will be taken care of, Mr. President. And the third bill is the legislative branch bill. That bill answers concerns that a lot of our members have about security in this increasingly polarized and difficult environment in which we live. But that's not all, Mr. President. And I want to correct any misimpression that has been given by some who have spoken today on the other side of the aisle. The Senate Majority Leader has given a public commitment that he will bring to the Senate floor bills that extend the Affordable Care Act, which unfortunately has turned out to be anything but affordable, but it will extend the premium tax credits that allow our lower income and middle income families to afford their much needed health insurance. In many cases, these are individuals who are self-employed, so they do not get health insurance through the workplace. Or they're the employees of small businesses that are unable to provide health insurance, particularly in this time when we're seeing skyrocketing premiums. So as I've said from the beginning, I support an extension of the ACA tax credits, but they need reform. It is wrong that wealthy families qualify for taxpayers' subsidized tax credits for their health insurance when they can afford their own health insurance. That was a change in Obamacare that was made during COVID. We should take a look at what the original income cap was under the Affordable Care Act. It was 400% of the poverty level. Now, we can decide what it should be, but surely we ought to be able to agree in a bipartisan way that there should be some cap on income so that very wealthy individuals are not able to receive taxpayer-funded tax credits. Let's limit that to those who are in middle income and lower income families. So there are other great ideas that have been raised by our colleagues on how we can reform the ACA to make health insurance more affordable. And I know that the chairs of both the Health Committee, Senator Cassidy, who is a medical doctor, as well as Chairman Mike Crapo from the Finance Committee, have promised to have hearings to take a hard look at this, and we have the commitment of the majority leader to bring these bills to the floor. So it's just not true that we're ignoring this issue. We do need to act by the end of the year, and that is exactly what the majority leader has promised. In addition, he has pledged to bring additional year-long appropriations bills to the Senate floor, and we will be doing that shortly, and that is the right thing to do. I want to thank the 8 Democrats who yesterday stood up for the American people and did what was right, pledged to reopen government, to pass these 3 appropriations bills that members of this chamber passed by over 80 votes on August 1st, and which will take away the threat of any kind of shutdown for the programs in those 3 bills. And as I mentioned, the last bill is the Ledge Branch bill. I want to thank Senator Mark Wayne Mullen for his leadership on that bill as well. We have terrific members of the Appropriations Committee on both sides of the aisle who have worked so hard. And I must say that I think all of them ought to be voting for this package of bills tonight. Mr. President, I made most of my comments yesterday when I brought these bills to the floor. There are others who are seeking recognition, so I will cease my remarks, but I just want to encourage everyone to cast their vote for this package of bills so that we can send it over to our House colleagues, where I hope they will do the same, and then send it to the President, who has already endorsed this package and pledged to sign the bill into law. Let's end this entirely unnecessary, shameful shutdown. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that there be 2 minutes of debate equally divided prior to each roll call in relation to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Without objection.